The Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean is the main intergovernmental forum on women's rights and gender equality in the region. The conference, which was established in 1977 as a subsidiary body of LAC, is convened on a regular basis to identify the situation of women's autonomy and rights at the regional and sub-regional levels, present public policy recommendations for gender equality, and undertake periodic assessments of the activities carried out in fulfillment of regional and international plans and agreements on the subject.
The Observatory of Social Development in Latin America and the Caribbean is one of ICLAC's regional knowledge tools. Its creation responds to a mandate of the second meeting of the Regional Conference on Social Development of Latin America and the Caribbean, when the member states requested that ICLAC establish an Observatory of Social Development to support the design and implementation of public policies and allow the monitoring of the trends. This way, the Observatory promotes the integral development of Latin America and the Caribbean with a focus on rights and equality through the analysis of the social situation of the region, public policies and technical assistance to the countries that request it. The Observatory also integrates a set of digital platforms. The databases are social investment, non-contributory social protection programs, institutional frameworks for social policy, youth and social inclusion, and regional and sub-regional commitments in social development. Through its Social Development Division, ICLAC publishes, updates, and expands these bases, which are available to governments and the general public.
The Statistical Conference of the Americas of ICLAC is a subsidiary body of the Commission whose mandates include promoting the development and improvement of national statistics and their international comparability. Bear in mind the recommendations of the United Nations Statistical Commission, the specialized agencies, and other organizations. The mandates of the conference also include the promotion of international, regional, and bilateral cooperation between national offices and international and regional organizations, as well as the preparation of a biennial program of regional and international cooperation activities that, subject to the availability of resources, responds to the demands of the countries of the region. The Strategic Plan 2015-2025 of the conference establishes as main lines of action the institutional strengthening and leadership role of national statistical offices, the development of human resources and statistical production to ensure their quality, and regional and international coordination and cooperation for the development of official statistics in the region. The 10th meeting of the Statistical Conference of the Americas, to be held from the 19th to the 21st November 2019, will bring together authorities and representatives of the national statistical offices and national statistical systems of ECLAC member countries to discuss the future of economic statistics in Latin America and the Caribbean, among other topics.
At present, Latin America is home to 826 indigenous peoples, which, by the year 2010, included nearly 45 million people, accounting for 8% of the region's population. The countries with the greatest proportion of indigenous peoples are Bolivia, Guatemala, Peru, and Mexico. There is huge diversity among indigenous peoples, with some remaining in voluntary isolation and others coexisting in big cities. Brazil has the greatest amount of indigenous peoples, followed by Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. Indigenous peoples represent one of the most disadvantaged groups in the region and have suffered the systematic loss of their lands, with severe consequences to their well-being. Nevertheless, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, has found some progress in recent years related to the recognition of their territorial rights and political participation. There have also been improvements in their living conditions, with greater access to healthcare and education. The United Nations has championed the promotion of indigenous peoples' rights and relies on 3 special resources for this purpose: a permanent forum, experts, a special rapporteur. At a regulatory level, indigenous peoples are protected by Convention number 169 of the International Labor Organization of 1989, which recognized their rights as peoples for the first time, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, which considers these peoples' rights to self-determination. In the context of these efforts, ECLAC calls for the region's countries to put policies in practice to end inequality suffered by indigenous peoples. Policies based on human rights standards and the perspectives and contributions of these peoples. This is crucial for the construction of a new development agenda beyond 2015, with equality at its heart.
The SDG Gateway is a web platform aiming to become a key factor for coordination and availability of the regional assets of the United Nations system in Latin America and the Caribbean. The main goal of this online knowledge management center is to serve as a meeting point and reference to all the information related to the Sustainable Development Goals, including activities, informational resources, statistics, regional data, specific analytic tools, and knowledge products developed and provided by the United Nations Development System in the region in response to its member countries. Visit this important multi-stakeholder platform and get to know more about this online regional knowledge management center. The COVID-19 Observatory in Latin America and the Caribbean is a platform promoted by ECLAC at the request of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, LAC. The observatory tracks the public policies that Latin American and Caribbean countries are implementing to limit the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Through reports and documents, it offers analysis of the economic and social impacts that these policies will have at the national and sectorial levels, in addition to supporting the review and monitoring in the medium and long term. In an interactive map, those interested can clearly visualize the actions taken by each country in the areas of movements, health, economy, labor, social protection, education, and gender. Visit ECLAC's COVID-19 Observatory and access updated information on policy measures to address the crisis in the region.
In the very year that the United Nations launched the Decade for Action to ignite a more purposeful understanding of the part of the international community towards advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the world has confronted unprecedented change in the specter of COVID-19.
Buen día, Costa Rica.
The multidimensional impact of this pandemic
Buenos días.
has served to dramatize
Buenos días,
the
vicecanciller. ¿Lo
true
escuchamos bien?
scale
¿Usted nos
of the
escucha?
vulnerability of the small,
Perfectamente.
heavily
Muy buenos
indebted,
Muchas
días.
gracias. Los vemos bien también.
economies of the Caribbean, and has forced creative exploration of every opportunity within the reach of our member states to secure urgent relief. The 2020 meetings of the Caribbean Development Roundtable and the Caribbean Development and Cooperation Committee will offer space for taking stock of the progress so far made in persuading the international community to extend this financial support needed, middle income status notwithstanding, and to dialogue on those
Buen día, señor López Calva.
that will take you from vulnerability to
Muy buen día, ¿me escucha bien?
from economic
Perfectamente.
peril to
¿Usted nos
recovery
escucha bien
and
también?
dynamic growth.
Muy bien, gracias.
It is an
Gracias.
opportunity to consider how together we strengthen partnerships for action that is responsive to the unique vulnerabilities of the Caribbean and that assures tangible progress through the application of innovative problem solving in these precarious times.
To support countries in the follow-up and monitoring of the medium and long-term progress of the crisis caused by COVID-19, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has produced a series of documents on the evolution and the effects of the pandemic in the region. These publications have been included in the COVID-19 Observatory in Latin America and the Caribbean, which compiles and makes available public policies that the 33 countries of Latin America and Caribbean region are taking to limit the impact of the pandemic, as well as the analysis of the economic and social impacts that these policies will have at the national and sectorial levels. LAC studies include a collection of special reports COVID-19 that deal with the economic and social effects of the crisis, as well as sectorial publications on specific topics such as the production of statistics, the right to life and health of older people, people with disabilities, the region's food systems, digitization opportunities, the care system, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the New Global Context, among other topics. This economic and social analysis will be updated as relevant information related to the COVID-19 pandemic emerges. Visit the ECLAC Observatory COVID-19 and access all these reports and updated information on policy measures to face the crisis in the region.
The Escazú Agreement is the first regional environment
Buen día, colegas. Hola, Luis Felipe.
Buen día, señor Verde, que lo
Hola,
escuchamos
muy
y lo
bien,
vemos
muy
muy
bien.
bien.
Muy buen día.
Buenos días, colegas. Laura saludando de DPPA desde Nueva York.
Hola, Laura. Bienvenida.
Buenos días. Vamos a iniciar entonces esta jornada. Vicecanciller Guillermet Fernández, presidente de este foro, la palabra con usted.
Muchas gracias, querido amigo, y muy buenos días a todos y a todas de estar el día de hoy acompañándonos en esta cuarta reunión del Foro de los Países de América Latina y el Caribe sobre desarrollo sostenible. Es un verdadero placer poder estar con ustedes. Han sido días de un trabajo muy profundo, de una reflexión conjunta sumamente interesante, donde creo que hemos encontrado palabras inspiradoras, ejemplos de maneras en que podemos articular de mejor manera el desarrollo sostenible en nuestros países y en nuestra región. En esta ocasión vamos a tener este diálogo sobre el del día de esta mañana.
In a dialogue at this final session, we will be hearing a presentation on the Regional Knowledge Platform on the 2030 Agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean, known as the SDG Gateway, and the thematic coalitions and working groups by the Vice President of the Regional Collaboration Platform for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have several panelists with us today who, of course, are very well known, and we look forward to hearing from them. So first, I would, without further ado, like to give the floor to our dear friend, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Alicia Barciana, and Felipe Galvez, in their capacity of vice chairs of the Regional Collaboration Platform for Latin America and the Caribbean, for their presentation on the SDG Gateway. You have the floor. It is a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Guillermet, dear friend. Thank you for that introduction. Indeed, what we will be doing, I hope, is to introduce to you, as we have done on other occasions, the platform, the gateway, but we'd like to do this in a fashion that allows us to show this very concretely, what has been done, what we want to make available to you. Now, a lot of teams have worked very hard on this. This is a collective effort, And this is the regional knowledge platform for SDGs. This presentation, of course, will be shared with all of you. And what we are seeking to do is to provide a point of reference for all of the information associated with the SDGs in Latin America and the Caribbean. We believe that this is a starting point for understanding what is happening in the region. This is the starting point, the point of reference, we hope, that will enable countries and the teams of the UN to obtain specialized knowledge, and particularly to see what everyone is doing, what the countries are doing, what the agencies are doing, what the different players are doing, even those in civil society, for example. And we believe that this helps to facilitate monitoring and follow-on of progress toward the SDGs, both nationally and regionally. I believe that this will be a platform that supports cooperation in sustainable development between and among all the entities of the UN system. It is a platform, as we presented the other day, that has 5 things that the UN is doing regionally, this reform, this development reform, and there are 2 of them specifically. That is the establishment of a regional management system, which is what we are presenting here. And second is the consolidation of data and statistical capabilities. Again, the Gateway seeks to serve that purpose, to make available all of the information available within the UN system. Now, this is a co-creation among all of these agencies that have collaborated in creating this gateway. Over 20 agencies, programs, and plans have participated. And this is, of course, in response to this call to action by the Secretary General and the member states to have in one single place the information about everything that we are doing in the agency's funds and programs, again, in one single platform. So this is what you will see when you enter the Gateway, this platform. Of course, we have updated this to include this 4th forum of countries of Latin America and the Caribbean that has been uploaded, and you can see what is happening, what the news is, and it is readily accessible. And when we enter the Gateway, as always, you can see the different tabs at the top. We can see that the first tab shows us to the 2030 agenda, the background, the high-level political forum, what it's about, the national voluntary reports and key decisions, and reports by the Secretary General. Since I can't navigate here, but you certainly can do, I'm going to assume that we're going to click on national voluntary reports, and then I can drill down into this and see that there are 31 countries in the region that have mechanisms for coordination for the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and that there are 35 voluntary national reports, 24 that have been presented to the high-level political forum between 2016 and 2020. This year, 11 countries will present their reports, 4 of them for the first time. And 14 countries in our region have presented more than one such report. Obviously, we can see this through 2020. We have not yet uploaded the 2020 reports. They will be presented at the HLPF. As soon as that happens, it will be included. But you can navigate through the page, and if you want, for example, to see what Brazil is doing, you click on Brazil, and you can then roll out the information. And what I'd like to do is show you these voluntary reports, these country reports, and I'd like to give you a couple of examples of that. When we look at regional architecture, the second tab from left to right, we can see what is happening across the region. We have this forum, Latin America and Caribbean countries, the subsidiary institutions and governmental institutions that work across the region, not just the statistics, office women population does report to ECLAC, but also UNDP, environment, habitat, and the urban aspects, all of the different governmental organisms that are present throughout the region, as well as the key decisions in the region, the decisions that have been made in these regional fora. We have the all-important SDG tab, where we can see the Sustainable Development Goals, and you can click on 1 or 2 or whatever number you want. And again, drill down, and you can see in a moment an example. And we can see the goals, the targets, the lessons, the messages, and so forth. Let's take a look at one of these. Let's say that we select one, end of poverty. We can see the goals and the indicators there. We can see the targets and indicators, 1.1, as well as the description of the goal, and see what has been included for the agenda. For example, how many people live with less than $1.25 a year? That's what the agenda says. Of course, we have other measurements, and we can compare and contrast that on the platform. We also have the different institutions there, UN institutions in the region, that are working specifically with project programs specifically associated with SDG 1. Obviously, UNDP, FAO, UN Women, UNESCO, UN Food Program, UNESCO. To a certain extent, we are all working, but this is mentioning the programs specifically that are involved. So as you continue to navigate through goal 1, you can see, for example, the indicator here. We're looking at 1.1. Let's say I want to look at 1.11. And then I want to see what the situation is of poverty and extreme poverty by age, geographic region, and so forth. This gives us the most up-to-date information that we have in terms of extreme poverty, gender, geographic area, and income. So we can see all of the information that's available there. We can see the document produced by UNDP called Beyond Income, a profile of poverty, has been uploaded here, and we can see all of the information that is available. In addition, we have all of the information from the ILO, and we can see what UNOPS is doing as well to combat corruption and what is happening in healthcare. We can see what is happening in Haiti, all of the information contained here with regard to SDGs 1 and 2. Then we can go to the country tab. Into the country tab, I'm sure you'll be interested in knowing what my home nation of Mexico is doing. Obviously, I can't give an example of every country, but we did pick one, and that is that of the chair, Costa Rica. Costa Rica, which has presented their voluntary report. They presented it in 2017 and 2020. They've created institutions, a statistical follow-on domestically, as well as the UN organization present in Costa Rica, where we have the resident coordinator, Alegra Balochi, and we can also see the link to the resident coordinator's office to see what the UN system is doing at the national level in Costa Rica. And we can also see the follow-on that's taking place in terms of SDGs and the institutions that have been created. All of this is then full of links. You can then connect and see what Costa Rica is doing. We can see what, if I want to look at Jamaica, the other example that we have selected that has presented their voluntary report in 2018, and we can see the planning that they are doing. We have the office here of Gary Conneal, in Jamaica, the resident director, and we can see everything that's being done there in this context for Jamaica, and so on and so forth through the 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean are listed on this page, as well as in some cases, the resident coordinators are not present in all countries. There may be some that cover more than one country, for example, Belize and El Salvador, in the case of Birgit yesterday when we were speaking about the Caribbean. And then if we turn to the statistics tab, this is one of the aspects that we have sought to strengthen across the platform. We can see here very clearly what is being done globally in the SDGs. We can see what is happening regionally in monitoring, because our region selected some SDGs. We're not trying to track all 200 and some SDGs and targets. We've selected a few for much more periodic tracking, and that's what we can see here. And of course, the national statistic tracking everything that we're getting from the National Statistics Office, where we can see where the data, those indicators are located, and what has been done in terms of the reports on SDGs, both globally, regionally, and nationally.
And the methodologies, resources, information, that's very important as well. People want to know, how was this measured? How did they take this measurement in my country? And so the information is there. And then we have an interactive dashboard with regard to the SDGs and the indicators. Now, this is quite interesting because this has been based on the Global Statistics Commission's global data, and we have embedded this with CEPALSTAT, which is ECLAC's statistics database, and we submit these in an annual report or certain periods, and we have made this much more modern so that it can be viewed by region. So all you need to do is click on each individual SDG, and you will see a menu with the information in that region and how you can use this information and download the information as well, because by the way, this is based on open data. For example, SDG 5, if we want to determine the femicide rate for a certain number of women, we could go to indicator 5.2.1 if we want to know the femicide rate for every 100,000 women. Here you have the information available per the countries that have provided this information. Not all the countries have this disaggregated data, and SDG by SDG, you can peruse and figure out where each nation stands. And also there's something else that's very important that I would like to underscore, and that is that in this region, we have a statistics coordination group for the 2030 agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have, on the one hand, we have that data and statistics group for the programs and funds, and all of this is also combined with the actions of ECLAC's Statistics Conference, where specifically we address the more technical aspects, and where we also work, our region that is actively involved in the interinstitutional group of experts on SDGs, and also actively involved in a high-level group for cooperation, collaboration, and promoting sustainable development. So we have 5 countries representing us in the interinstitutional group and another 5 on the high level group. And they go to headquarters, they become informed as to what's going on at the global level, and then they come back here to report to the Americas, the Conference of Statistics of the Americas. We have a very active interagency group as well, with UN funds, programs, etc. So this statistics dashboard provides information at the national level, regional level. For example, what is going on in Peru? What is Peru doing? What type of institutional arrangements exist there? What does the Peruvian National Statistics Office state? And what other groups are active in Peru with regard to following up on the indicators? It's not necessarily just the NSOs that do this. And what about Colombia? Colombia actually is presiding over the Statistics Conference of the Americas at present. And so you have all this wealth of information that Colombia has done. They have a great deal of information disaggregated nationally. And by the way, the information reported here comes from the country's specific agencies, the countries that have uploaded their information to the platform. And that's the goal, correct? If you want to know what Colombia and Peru are doing with regard to statistics, you can't obtain that information on this platform. And of course, you have the UN system. This is another one of the aspects that we worked on collectively. I would like to mention that there has been a very active participation by many individuals, the UNDP and ECLAC. We are the chairs, the co-chairs of the steering committee, but also it's important to mention that all the other agencies have been involved, some more actively than others, such as UN Women or the UN Environment Program, for example. And we have provided the technical support to ensure the success of this gateway and that it's updated daily. Also, let's assume you want to know what UN Women is doing. Okay, that's fine. You click on that tab and you will be immediately brought to the website, to the webpage with a description of what UN Women is, what specific indicators, SDGs they're working on more in depth. And UN Women, for example, is working a great deal on SDG 8, which is employment. And so this information is constantly updated. And the information comes from the UN Women official site. And of course, all of the data that UN Women is providing on a platform called Women Count. It's very interesting, by the way, and it's essential. Now, FAO, the same applies. Here you have information as to where FAO is focusing its efforts. It's practically focusing on 15 of the SDGs. And you have the official website of FAO, and this document is full of a wealth of information, and you will be able to peruse all of the various UN agencies, funds, and programs, and you will find a wealth of information here relative to their specific mandates. And then let's look into another aspect of the gateway. You have information with regard to technical assistance for statistics, these actions. Now, all of the agencies are working on monitoring and reporting on the SDGs. Of course, UNDP, the UN Women, UNICEF, the ILO, PAHO, FAO, the UNODC, UNESCO, etc. So here you have all of the information measurement and dissemination information and support for the institutional arrangements. And UNFPA, the Population Fund, has done something quite interesting. They have taken actions to boost demographic measurements. Now that's interesting because UNFPA has disaggregated the SDGs with demographic data and has determined how you can better analyze legal frameworks to determine whether or not, well, for example, whether or not the Afro-descendant groups, we've worked with them jointly with this, and we know that this information is uploaded. But for example, what if you want to know what the governments have done, whether or not they have internalized this information, for example, with regard to the Afro-descendant populations as part of their principles and their official statistics, okay? We have measured these, but we don't know to what extent the governments have adopted these, and UNFPA has done a fabulous job here. And then we have two additional tabs. The stakeholders. Here I would like to mention that we have civil society, local governments, academia. This is your tool as well. Please submit your information to us. CPA has submitted some very interesting information with regard to the national anti-COVID measures. They have conducted an analysis with regard for the civil society perspective. And here we need to include everything that is important and relevant to civil society. And of course, this is a platform, a gateway available for you to post your information, your data, and of course, the private sector. There was an active panel involving the private sector. We know that a wealth of funds are being invested in the renewable sectors in our region. And so you have information as to what NL is doing in this realm and their proposals, their ideas and initiatives. So that is the purpose of all of this. And it's so closely tied to the 2030 agenda. And of course, information, technology tools, information tools. Here we have video, charts, graphs, publications, etc. And all of this is based on the UN agency fund program data. For example, we have some information related to recent actions relative to COVID-19. UNDP has information here at ECLAC as well. We have published more than 10 special reports, and all of the agencies across the board, funds and programs have done something related to COVID. And this information is available here under this tab called Information Tools. Now, I do not have more time, so allow me to close by making it clear that this is a joint effort by the UN agencies, funds, and programs, and this also involves the 33 national voluntary national reports. And now there's quite a commitment here. There's more than 2,500 bits of information from the UN family, regional databases, national statistics profiles, progress reports, based on more than 50 databases related to the indicators. And of course, there are clear references to the institutional architecture required to implement the 2030 agenda nationally, regionally, etc., as well as the coordination mechanisms. I hope I have provided you with the broad strokes of what is being carried out in this realm. And I would like to mention the entire UN team, my colleagues specifically who have made this possible. Rolando Campo is here with me today, Diego Zabaleta, the UNDP team as well. And I would also like to greet Luis Felipe Calva, who is doing a joint effort with us. We've been working closely, and we've been working with all of the UN family agencies, funds, and programs. And this is a very concrete outcome. That is what we aim to do and want to do, is to provide you with concrete outcomes. Thank you very much.
Alicia, pasamos directo.
Let us now move on to the presentation on thematic aspects. Yes. Yes, this is a tool, valuable tool for cooperation. Perhaps Luis Lopez Calva would like to take the floor right now, perhaps, to remark upon this fabulous tool that Alicia has just presented. Felipe? Yes, thank you, Vice Minister. It seems as though the presentation has been extremely comprehensive. I would like to refer to the thematic coalitions. Do we have a few moments to refer to that? Perhaps, what would you like for me to do? I could refer to the gateway and then move on with my presentation. Sure, go ahead. I would truly appreciate it if you would begin with your presentation. Thank you. Greetings. Thank you, Alicia, for that presentation that was so comprehensive and complete. And greetings, of course, to all of my colleagues from the UN family. Greetings to the representatives and delegates present at the forum, to all of the permanent representatives and representatives in New York, as well as the resident coordinators joining us and all other participants. Greetings. Now, with regard to a follow-up on the meeting held on March 16th, on Tuesday, when we submitted a report on the outcome of the transitional report toward the regional collaboration platform, allow me to refer to next steps, the future perspective, and what we are working on collectively, and how we have actually designed that interagency collaborative work to be as effective as possible when providing support to the country teams, and also to address regional and sub-regional aspects. So if you will allow me, I would like to share a presentation with you that provides us with an overview of the activities that we are proposing for the future. And I would truly appreciate your feedback on this. First of all, I would like to mention that, well, last Tuesday, we already referred to the idea that the principles have been, of course, agreed to at the regional platform level, and we have several: economic diversification, effective governance, universal social welfare regime, the need to have increased access to financing for development under more flexible and sustainable conditions, protecting vulnerable groups, and a systemic approach to risk management. And this is essentially it's a summary of what we discussed on Tuesday. Now, let me provide you with some figures because these provide us with the evidence we need. Now, this graph, I believe, is quite representative. It refers to the growth by regions around the globe, and our region in the long term essentially shows not so desirable growth, leaves quite a bit to be desired. Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, is shown. We are, apart from that region, we are the most unequal region in the world. Economic diversification is a key aspect here, and of course, ECLAC has worked diligently on this. We have an index, the Economic Complexity Index. Here, you have the country ranking. According to this index, Japan is ranked the highest in terms of economic complexity, and you have for Latin America, we have a relatively low ranking. That reveals that we need to increase the diversification, economic complexity of our economies. Here, there is information from a recent survey that shows, of course, and this is based on perceptions, okay? The perceptions of the individuals surveyed. This was conducted by the UNDP, and it shows that in most countries, more than 50% of the people believe that the government's decision regarding COVID-19 has been more beneficial for certain groups. And we are concerned with this, obviously, because of the implications it has for trust in government. Now, as far as the world, we have low performance in terms of effective governance in our region, according to the information. 9% of the world population, LAC has 9% of the world population, accounts for more than 30% of global homicides. So that is quite concerning. It's a violent region, and we need to address that issue. Obviously, it's related to governance, but at the same time, it's also important to mention that there's minimal representation of women in decision-making posts. Now, all of this is addressed in our diagnosis, our assessment of the overall issues. Now, we have high levels of informality in our economies. Here you can see the data for women and for men. There's a higher level of informality for women in the labor market, revealing more vulnerability, but overall there's a high level of informal employment. And this is key with regard to social protection, because this leads us to understand that it's necessary to use different mechanisms and tools, and informality needs to be addressed from a segmented approach as well, because of the high population of individuals, high number of individuals who are excluded from the formal income or protection distribution systems. And here we have social spending, fiscal measures in response to the pandemic, percentage of GDP, for example, in order to respond to the crisis. If one would like to maintain that level of response, which is obviously key, we would like to be, in fact, more ambitious. We don't want to leave it at that level. And if that's the case, we will see that at least $228 billion will be required just to maintain that level. Of course, if we want to have flexible access to financing measures. And our population is quite vulnerable in terms of income and poverty. We have seen that poverty levels increased during COVID, and the vulnerable population is there is a certain group of individuals who are on the verge of falling under the poverty line. You can see that 22 million people fell into poverty in LAC in 2020. So you can see this level of vulnerability. And how can we address this? Well, that's essential to figure out. Also, we need to bear in mind that our region has more than 1/3 of the population aged 15 to 35. So we have a young population, a young region, and accordingly, we need to understand that our youth is a significant asset for today and the future, and then we have to figure out how to systemically address risk.
We have a region that has ups and downs in terms of growth. This is the number of years with negative growth. I think it's always extremely important to show this. This is since the number of years in recession since 1980. We can see that many countries in our region are far above many of the more developed countries. We certainly have a huge gap in that regard, as well as the issue of climate change and climate crisis. Of course, this comes from UNDP. There are two elements that pose concerns in technical terms. First, the climate shocks, which of course has led to the Mexico, Peru, Chile mutual assurance system for earthquakes, but there are others that have to do with distribution. As we can see, these extreme natural hazards shows how destructive these climate shocks have been in recent years. As we can see that the extreme events are become both more frequent and more severe. This therefore requires a supplementary, if not different, approach.
the respective roles of the private sector and the public sector, define what the nature of private engagement in the provision of public or quasi-public goods should be, and what should be the nature of the government's contribution to a partnership with the private sector. I think there needs to be a lot deeper understanding of the nature of the risk perception that private investors have. And one has to make an effort to inform and raise the awareness of the actual risk that is inherent in our economies, as opposed to the perceived risk of investors that are somewhat distant from our markets. But there are other forms of risk reduction, including through credible and rational and consistent policy, through appropriate incentive systems, through rational taxes and expenditure policies. Governments can also spend time and effort in developing or helping to develop a pipeline of investable projects at scale, not only in the public sector, but also by providing support and extension services to private sector projects. Governments need to consider the scope for aggregation across jurisdictions where necessary, across sectors, so as to reach investable scale, because many of our projects are commensurate with the size of our economies, but they're not big enough to mobilize the large-scale international finance. And finally, I think we need to examine a wider range of financial instruments and options and innovative approaches to mobilizing resources, approaches that may not necessarily entail a rising level of debt. The fourth priority is social protection. We have to ensure that there is adequate and robust social protection for all. The economics of that are clear. As we saw very clearly in the last major crisis 10 years ago, the countries that had in place robust social protection systems suffered a much less severe deterioration of the livelihoods and the social situation of their citizens. The impact on inequality is critical. And so one of the things that governments need to try to do is to preserve those temporary emergency measures that they put in place as part of the emergency response to COVID for as long as possible, and to seek to integrate these into permanent systems. And in the context of that shift to a permanent system, one has to consider the opportunity to shift the financing from beneficiary contributions, which actually limit the social protection to those who are in formal jobs in the formal sector, and shift towards a system that is funded out of general tax revenues. Hybrid models can also be considered, because that is the way in which social protection can be provided to all. Other policy priorities, however, need to come into play. We have job creation, as we spoke about a little earlier, educational systems that promote equality, particularly for girls, and educational systems that also build up digital skills and literacy, enabling people to take advantage of the digital transformation that's going on. Policies have to tackle prejudice and discrimination based on gender, race, or ethnicity head on. And one factor we cannot afford to ignore is the need for a comprehensive civil registration and legal identity, because these are the elements that allow citizens to access their social services and the protection systems. And finally, the fifth priority is domestic finance. Of course, domestic revenue mobilization has to be mobilized, has to be strengthened. It is the fundamental and most important source of funding for sustainable development investments. And this can be administrative reforms, closing off tax loopholes. There's necessarily going to be scope and need for greater international cooperation, particularly in combating the illicit financial flows that were referred to earlier. But I think much more has to be done to mobilize the domestic financial system to provide more funding for sustainable activities. And that can take the form of adjustments of financial regulations. For example, more expensive provisioning of loans to non-sustainable activities, or refusal outright to refinance those loans. More stringent reporting requirements, for example, or mandatory reporting of climate risk exposure or of ecological footprints. Green finance guidelines can be provided that will help steer the private financial industry towards greater sustainability. The role of the central bank needs also to be looked at. We've seen in the response to the crisis how central banks have been very innovative and very proactive, not just in the big, sophisticated, advanced country markets, but we can also make sure that the interventions of central banks are linked to the clear purpose of fostering the finance for sustainable activities. And that can also entail using monetary policies, central bank interest rates, for example, to help guide bank lending practices towards lending for sustainable activities. Most important of all, I think, is that we have to encourage and support domestic commercial banks, perhaps in partnership with national development banks or regional development banks, to engage much more proactively in financing SDG-related activities. It's a greater willingness to intermediate risk, but it's also providing greater support to building the capacity to formulate bankable projects by their clients. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said nothing about debt or trade. Both of these actually require the international approach. They require the multilateral collaboration. But each country can and of course must contribute to building up that spirit of multilateral cooperation. In the area of debt, we can all come up with ideas for managing the debt, for debt restructuring, debt reduction, innovative ideas, and ECLAC has been a pioneer in that for decades. But we need to build on that. And we need to build up the political consensus for a comprehensive solution, working through our sub-regional and regional organizations to support what's already happening at the global level. We need to engage with private sector creditors as well, to include them in the solution, but also with private sector debtors, because governments are not the only ones struggling with unmanageable debt burdens. And finally, in trade, we have to all recommit to the principles of the multilateral rules-based non-discriminatory trading system. And we have to work proactively for a reform of the World Trade Organization. But we also need to use our regional and sub-regional organizations as a counterweight to the proliferation of bilateral and plurilateral trade and investment agreements that are increasingly complicating global trade. And we have to collaborate with other countries in our region to consider how global value chains are being and how they should be adjusted and reformed in the wake of the shocks that COVID-19 has caused. And finally, we need to strengthen our regional arrangements for the provision of trade finance, which remains one of the major hindrances to the effective participation of developing countries in global trade. It's a very ambitious agenda, ladies and gentlemen, and by far, those few priorities that I've mentioned have not covered the whole range of things that need to be paid attention to. But I do think that these were areas where, prior to COVID, we did not make enough of an effort to ensure that our policies were consistent with the measure of our aspirations under the Sustainable Development Agenda. Building forward better, recovering in a way that puts us back on track to reach the 2030 agenda by 2030 will require that we resolve these weaknesses as priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, for your thoughts and to share with us some paths that we can work together on that. Agradeciéndole realmente sus...
Thank you very much for your remarks, and we can see that over the next few days, months can move forward, but particularly the agenda that you have proposed in a very ambitious fashion. We do need to be ambitious because that is ambition that responds to the magnitude of the challenges before us. I see no other path forward than that of the ambitious path that you have presented, and therefore I appreciate particularly the remarks from our speaker from the United Nations, Mr. Harris. Thank you again, and at this time I would like to introduce a video by the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, former President Michelle Bachelet, who I will give the floor by video. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I appreciate this opportunity to address the steps that need to be taken to implement the SDG agenda for 2030. Today, leaders across the globe are confronting the tremendous and challenging task of addressing the challenges that COVID-19 has brought forward. We must continue to move forward despite the existing challenges, despite the issues that are before us. Given the discrimination, the challenges before us, the crisis has affected the entire world, but it has hit particularly hard in Latin America and the Caribbean. While the region only represents 8.4% of worldwide population in 2020, as of December, it nonetheless accounted for 18.4% of the contagions, and a significant number of deaths. These figures come from ECLAC that also informs us that poverty and extreme poverty have increased in the region. Poverty went from 170 million and moved to from 70 to 78 million over the course of the last year. Overall GDP in Latin America and the Caribbean dropped by 7.7% over the region, and the number of unemployed people rose by 44.1%. 3 million students in Latin America may be unable to go back to school after the pandemic. It is important, of course, to look at the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the marginalized groups. Of course, we've seen the health impact in inequality, and we've seen, of course, this has been the primary reason why millions of people lacked access to quality services in recent years. However, many countries in the region have experienced an expansion of this discrimination and these issues. And this fundamentally is due to a lack of access to social and economic rights, corruption, and outward discrimination. The humanitarian crisis that is emerging as a result of this pandemic has expanded on that inequality and may lead to another upsurge in social unrest and discontent. We can also see the backsliding of the achievements made in economic growth and the equality of rights among women. The data is not hopeful, and numbers are people, not just mere figures. They are individuals and their dreams. In this case, millions of people who are being left behind. If we are going to build back or build forward better, we have the opportunity of our lifetime and the moral responsibility to do so. There's only one way to do this, and that is to focus on human rights, in creating a new social compact with opportunities for all, as the Secretary General has encouraged us to do by placing an accent on human rights. This is the message that I want to share with ECOSOC and with you. Individuals and human rights should be at the heart of sustainable development and in the response to the pandemic. But what does it mean to rebuild better? It means grappling with inequalities and focusing on social, economic, and cultural rights. ECLAC has provided important solutions in this regard. There are many long-term solutions that are needed in this area in terms of social protections. Health coverage, universal health coverage is a fundamental component. Since I started as a High Commissioner, we have looked intensively at these types of rights, as well as sustainable development, looking at a vast array of processes. We have moved forward toward these rights through a process that highlights human rights, that looks at making the best use of available resources. We cannot move forward better with measures that impose austerity or the concentration of wealth. We need to mobilize domestic resources toward more progressive tax systems and create mechanisms such as the one adopted recently in Argentina and Bolivia, such as a tax on wealth. It is straightforward. Those who have more should contribute more so that we can all recover.
The world needs new levels of global cooperation and international solidarity, in addition to fairer globalization that focuses on the right to development. We all have our own individual roles to play here. I am convinced the only way to efficiently tackle these challenges imposed by the pandemic is to involve the population. Participation is not just a right, it's a key component if we are going to secure sustainable recovery. In 2020, we have seen that there have been serious restrictions to civil rights. For example, the restrictions on the right to meet, to right to gather, the right to express one's opinion. Now, these were necessary, perhaps, measures to address the virus and contain the pandemic. In some cases, they have been disproportionate and unnecessary. Freedom is key. Civic space is essential. And this is part of the rule of law, individuals' rights to be there. Journalists' rights have been trampled. In fact, we have seen that there have been many campaigns on social media, negative campaigns, and we have seen Individuals have been locked up because of curfews, and this has affected the most vulnerable part of the population. We have seen that the states have a reduced capacity to conduct oversight on terms of environmental crimes and indigenous peoples areas. Now, the indigenous peoples have been invaded by extractive industry, drug trafficking, etc. If we want to build a better world, we need to protect all individuals' environmental rights. And in this regard, I am very pleased to see that we will see the new entrance into effectiveness of the Escazú agreement. This will allow us to protect the environmental rights advocates. This also I would like to encourage countries who have not yet ratified this to do so soon. Dear friends, I am very concerned about the inequities between countries and in countries. And now let me refer to distribution of the vaccine. The pandemic has made it clear that we will only be safe when we all are safe. That's why it is necessary to ensure that vaccinations are provided to all individuals and that there's access to all. I am referring, of course, to the COVID-19 vaccine, but let me go beyond that. I am referring to a vaccination for poverty, hunger inequality, for the lack of a social system to provide protections to all, and vaccinations for other scourges facing humanity that humanity will and does face today. Now, we know that we have had past crises, and the vaccination that I am referring to is human rights. Thank you. Thank you to the High Commissioner for her inspiring remarks. Now, I hope that we will all be vaccinated with the vaccine that you referred to, which is the human rights vaccine, before we get vaccinated by the COVID vaccine. In any event, you referred to a long laundry list of challenges that we all face, and as a result, our responses need to focus on human beings. And I would also like to thank the High Commissioner for providing us with all of these figures, the figures related to poverty, vulnerability, the mortality rate resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic in our region. Now, what is true is that only together will we be able to make progress. This is a lesson learned. It will do no good to just have a handful of individuals vaccinated. We all must be inoculated. And this path forward, we can only go down it together. And we can only do this while our human rights are fully respected, so that we can ensure that our societies will be more resilient, and more protected and recovered and green. So anyhow, let me now give the floor to Luis Felipe López Calva, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UNDP. You have the floor, Luis Felipe. Thank you, distinguished Vice Minister. First of all, I would like to greet and particularly thank the Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Alicia Bárcena, for having invited me to join this high-level panel. And of course, warm special greetings to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico to the United Nations, Maria Jose Lubertino. Virtual greetings to the High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General for UNDESA, and the focal point, as I mentioned, Maria Jose Lubertino, the focal point of the Southern Cone Regional Group of the Mechanism for Civil Society Participation, and all the ministers, permanent representatives, and delegates. It's quite an honor to be invited to be taking part in this closing round table and to refer to this dialogue, building an inclusive and effective pathway to achieve the 2030 agenda within the context of the decade of action and post-pandemic recovery from COVID-19. Now, we would like for this to be better than what we ever imagined, for it to be sustainable and inclusive and provide us with a healthy, safe path forward. Now, I am very pleased to see the success of this event, thanks to ECLAC and Costa Rica and everyone else. Thank you for all of that. I am not just referring to the national authorities who have been engaged in this event, but also the representatives of the UN agencies, funds, programs, the resident coordinators, representatives from civil society, from private sector, from academia, and all of the individuals who have taken part in this important forum. Regional recovery clearly is an overwhelming challenge and involves a great deal of uncertainty. It is essential to ensure that a series of enablers, drivers take place. For example, we need to ensure equitable access to universal vaccination, and that these campaigns be rolled out as quickly as possible to halt the arrival of new strains and additional contagion. It's essential for all of us to be immunized against this virus. Secondly, it seems as though it's essential to support the governments in the region with regard to spending so that we can reactivate the economies. Thirdly, it's important to focus on the renewing the industrial structure with policies that will provide support for the employment sector, for SMEs. And fourthly, let's take advantage of what we've learned from the pandemic and move toward inclusive digital communities, societies. This calls for three key aspects. One, it's necessary to support and set up and provide appropriate infrastructure. Two, to provide access to the households, to computers, devices, mobile phones, and also invest in capacity with regard to education and training so that individuals will have the digital skills to use these devices effectively. And then finally, implement regulations that will ensure that digital services will foster greater productivity and not bring about excessive revenue for certain parties or distort the market. And finally, and not because this is less important, it's just as important as all the other factors, or perhaps even more important than the previous mentioned factors. It's essential to bring the education systems back on board as soon as possible so that we can ensure that our human resources are as robust as possible in the education field. Now, also, it is essential for governments' capacities to have the capacity to bring about all of these conditions. Governance will be key. I believe governance may be a turning point that would allow us to be better poised to come up with these new social and economic policies that will bring about social cohesion and economic and social stability. This is an opportunity to revisit our policies that we have implemented, allowing us to redefine the rules of the game and to mix up the coalitions of individuals taking part in the decision-making process. I think this is time. This is the moment for action. The longer we take, the less effective we will be. Finally, I would like to mention that since 2019, there have been several meetings, for example, the third version of this forum that took place in Chile. We have seen several actions by counterparts, a variety of different actors, countries, etc. And I have, since 2019, I have been listening to the emphasis, the importance of the UDP and its role, given its historic performance and its emphasis on governance. Now, we have seen that there's been a systemic crisis that is resulting from COVID-19, and the UNDP has held a series of regional consultations and has held over 100 meetings and has polled opinion leaders, young people, civil society to draw up a series of effective governance principles related to the COVID-19 context. Now, there's a document that is actually available today, and it has been published and has been disseminated, and there are 8 principles that have resulted from this consultation: fiscal compact, active participation of citizens in decision-making processes related to them, accountability, not using violence as a tool for political negotiations, justice for all, innovating in terms of the state mechanism, generating greater trust, and others. Now, these 8 areas are the new areas where the UNDP is focusing its efforts. Now, let me refer to the corporate realm. We are providing support to countries with regard to setting up universal, inclusive, fiscally sustainable, and growth-friendly protection systems. Now, we are also focusing on green and blue economies and ways to make these economies more robust, and transitioning toward clean economies to foster inclusive digital connection, etc. Now, I would like to reiterate how complex this is. The agenda we face is very intricate, and it's essential to be unified if we are going to be able to follow this sustainable path forward. In that regard, I would like to reiterate the commitment, the firm, solid commitment of the UNDP to continue providing support for the member states in terms of implementing these aspects, and our constant ongoing support for the more vulnerable, and also our support of the 2030 agenda. Likewise, as co-chair of the SDG Gateway that we presented, I wanted to thank all of the support that we have received from our various colleagues and the close ties that were developed with my co-chair, Alicia Barcena. As we mentioned this morning, the partnerships that we are focusing on will allow us to build capacity that we can apply to support the member states and all the various country offices in the field, the resident coordinators, because the idea is for all of us to work together to provide support to ensure the success of this agenda. So thank you, and I commend you all for such a successful event. Thank you, Luis Felipe. Thank you for such a comprehensive outlook related to what the UNDP has been working on. Now allow me to give the floor to our dear friend and colleague, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Alicia Barcena, our fearless leader, the individual who has inspired us on a daily basis with regard to our work. So, dear Alicia, you have the floor. Thank you. Dear Christian Guillermet Fernandez, the Vice Chancellor for Multilateral Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica, thank you for your magnificent work leading and presiding over the forum. It's been fabulous. I would like to provide warm salutations and greetings to Juan Sandoval Mendiola, Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico to the United Nations and the chair of the Group of Friends of the Voluntary National Review. Thank you so much as well, Juan, for joining us and for your very clear remarks. I would also like to greet my dear friend, Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has sent us a very powerful video message today with regard to rights and the right to be vaccinated. Key message. Elliot Harris.
Today, DESA is clearly very well represented with you. Luis Felipe.
And Luis Felipe as well, my dear colleague and the co-chair. We together have worked quite closely. I would also like to extend very special greetings to Maria Jose Lubertino, focal point of the Southern Cone Regional Group of the linking table or actually the focus on the Southern Cone Regional Group of the Mechanism for Civil Society Participation in the Sustainable Development Agenda. The voice of civil society is essential and has always been over these last few days of the forum. Of course, I would like to greet all of the national authorities who have joined us over these past few days, members of the diplomatic corps, dear fellow directors of the UN agencies, funds, and programs that have been present and that have also held side events with us over the last few days, dear resident coordinators as well of the UN system in the region, and all of the representatives of international organizations, of the private sector, academia, civil society, of course, and my dear colleagues from ECLAC.
Gracias, amigos.
Dear friends, today we are closing out an intense, demanding week, but one that has been deeply gratifying as a result of the efforts and contributions of each of you. Every one of you, the space for dialogue and participation, cooperation, and solidarity has been, for the fourth time, a meeting place for the voices of Latin America and the Caribbean, and for the very much necessary and pertinent reflections and proposals. Following several arduous days of dialogue, of agreements, of recognizing progress and identifying challenges, we leave here with the responsibility given to us by the regional consensus that you have just approved, which endorses the urgent need to build fair and sustainable societies that confront inequality and ensure citizenship and rights. The urgent need to act together as a region to ensure access to vaccines and to share capacities and experiences so that vaccination reaches all of our population. This is a necessary and indispensable condition for the transformative recovery with equality and sustainability, as Michelle, of course, has said, Elliot, and of course, Juan as well, and you also, Vice Chancellor. Thank you also to Costa Rica and President Carlos Alvarado and his splendid team for the Vice Chancellor, and also Adriana Balaño, Brita Hernandez. I know that she's with you there in San Jose. Adriana Murillo, who's here with us, Rodrigo Carazo, who is in New York, and all of the cabinet members of Costa Rica who have participated in the leadership that you have had in this forum of Latin American and Caribbean countries on sustainable development, and for your unwavering commitment to regional and international cooperation and solidarity. I would also like to thank the government of Cuba, which preceded you in chairing this forum, also with a tremendous commitment to multilateralism. Dear friends, some 1,300 people registered to participate in this forum, some 600 of them over social media. This includes representatives of 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. We've also had the online virtual presence of 20 representatives of the agencies, funds, and programs of the United Nations. And of course, our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, and today our friend Michelle Bachelet, Juan Sandoval, who has also been helping us from the very beginning as the chair of the Friends of the Voluntary National Reports. We've had the participation of 24 intergovernmental organizations, not just the UN, as well as 118 people from academia, 38 from the private sector, and the privilege to have had over 440 people from civil society across the region joining us at the event. Our local authorities, our indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, individuals with disabilities, you are all welcome, and we thank you all for participating, because we have had over 31 parallel events, side events, with the participation of ministers from society, with senior representatives. And let me highlight one example, which was a consultation that we engaged in conjunction with the FAO. And I believe that this also will be of tremendous importance in fueling the conversation of the FAO Forum that will happen later this year. The Forum of Latin American Caribbean Countries on Sustainable Development is a space that allows the region to speak with its own identity about our realities, our specificities, to recognize our rich diversity, but at the same time to encourage and to converge on common aspirations. Once again, our region has demonstrated its enormous commitment to unity, cooperation, multilateralism, and a transformative recovery, a key requirement for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. We have understood that it's necessary to break down silos and to work with complementarity to address the terrible blows that the pandemic and ensuing crisis have dealt to the peoples of our region. That is why we are cognizant in the system, the UN system, that we need to act collectively. No one can act individually without the support of others. And therefore, I would like to thank all the agencies, funds, and programs that have joined together so that we can, in truth, effectively respond to the challenges that this pandemic has posed. In these last few days, under the aegis of this forum, Latin America and the Caribbean has committed to overcome inertia, to not return to a pattern of development with slow growth, low productivity, insufficient employment, poverty, inequality, and acute environmental and social crises. Because as Luis Berto told us on day one, there is nowhere to go back to because the world has changed. We have spoken loudly and clearly in favor of equality, and we have said that equality is not the result of economic growth. It is a necessary, indispensable condition for efficiency and for growth itself. The region has endorsed the urgency of moving forward toward a caring society and has strongly recognized that when a woman advances and transforms, we all advance, because when women advance, our society progress. But we need a care-based society that seeks universal support and care for all public goods so that we can protect the planet as well. We have learned very important lessons from this pandemic. The first is that there are very serious global asymmetries that have become even more evident. We were already witnessing the financial and climatic asymmetries, but today we are the witnesses of the asymmetry in access to health and to vaccines. And we are living in a new geopolitics of vaccine generation, production, and distribution. For this reason, the challenge of vaccination is at the heart of our current situation. We note that we have already transpired the first fifth of the 21st century, and we inhabit a world that is more unequal than ever before. We have some countries that have up to 3 times more vaccines committed than they need. Others have none at all. So we need to engage with the countries in our region. Let's start with them, particularly those that have a surplus of vaccines, to create a mechanism to ensure that they are distributed, hopefully in our own hemisphere. We need to step up the pace, because at the current pace of distribution and availability, the countries in the region will move at different speeds. Those who are able to reach herd immunity in the near future, and those that will have to wait until 2023. We cannot create islands of immunity. In this scenario, it is high time for Latin America and the Caribbean to act collectively and to seize this opportunity to strengthen once and for all regional integration. It is time for coordinated actions in the acquisition of vaccines with hemispheric solidarity to occur, strongly supporting the Pan American Health Organization, which is ours. It is regional and it is universal. And while we know that COVAX will not be the sole solution for our region, we need to support PAHO in its expansion and the growth within its own possibilities. ECLAC has proposed strengthening regional coordination mechanisms for vaccine procurement, promoting the full cooperation and operation of the COVAX initiative, awareness campaigns for the population that does not want to be vaccinated so that they will do so, negotiation with countries that will have a surplus of vaccines or that have them, the exchange of information on best practices in the vaccination process, such as Chile, Uruguay, Costa Rica, and others that have very high quality primary care systems, as well as the relaxation of intellectual property regimes. This is extremely important. We need to support production in our region itself. The region needs to support LAC. The government of Mexico has made a tremendous effort to change the conversation about vaccines from the pro-tempore presidency of the bloc that has spoken to the world and is presented before the United Nations, an initiative for equitable access, not just to vaccines, but also to medication and supplies. That is a very important position that we must support regionally. President Alvarado has also forwarded important proposals with regard to medication and supplies. Therefore, we need to work together as a region. Initiatives such as the joint production between Mexico and Argentina should lead to better regional integration in efforts such as those proposed by Costa Rica will lead to to generate a health manufacturing industry. Then this will require more equitable multilateralism. We must take advantage of the synergies of integration systems, such as we've seen here in CARICOM and the SICA integration system. At the national level, the pandemic has shown us that the countries with stronger health and social protection systems are more resilient in the face of the pandemic. But there's one thing that is clear. There is no dilemma, no dichotomy between health and economy, because without health, there will be no economy. Second, our societies need to move forward toward resilience. We must consolidate societies that are able to absorb change, to renew and recreate themselves. The only way forward is to move forward toward a society of care, a society that puts an accent on social protection, health, universal access to public services, the internet and drinking water. That is fundamental, as well as the care for the planet. We need to create new social compacts, coalitions that move forward toward a society of care and a new productive system. It is not sufficient just to change the institutions. We need to go to the causes and the structural root causes of our structural inequality. We also need to put women at the forefront so that they are not bearing all of this weight. Thirdly, we need to create value and create wealth, not just to extract it without innovation and little job creation. That is why we are concerned about the trends that we see toward reprimarization, rising commodity prices, and the momentum of the global economy, particularly China's, may lead us to extractivism rather than innovation. We need industrial and technological policies that act in line with environmental criteria to drive sectors that support a transformative recovery and that generate employment and reduce the environmental footprint. Over the past year, our attention has greatly been focused on the pandemic and its impacts. However, even in the midst of this crisis, it is imperative that we return to the path of sustainable development, and the transformative reconstruction is forged upon environmentally sustainable foundations. The scientific community has constantly warned us about the seriousness of the environmental issue. We have surpassed critical planetary thresholds. 47% of our natural ecosystems are deteriorated, and perhaps of the greatest concern is the destruction of key systems of ecology that jeopardize the future of food supply. We have insisted that environmental issues are crucial to connect the emergency with the recovery and the decade of action to address the planet's major challenges. An economic recovery on the basis of environmental sustainability and equitable basis allows us to recover from the recession more quickly with substantial improvements to quality of life, and as well as healthcare, life, and better jobs. This requires policies consistent with the 2030 agenda and new internal, domestic, and international political coalitions, as well as an unprecedented form of international cooperation to sustain the change and development style. We are very, very proud of the successful process of approval and implementation of the Escazú Agreement that is evidence and proof that progress is possible, that it can be done, that we can create new types of agreements. We cannot continue to do the same thing and expect different results. We must change our path and we must move forward toward the 2030 agenda. We are cognizant that the continent is extremely complex, but we are convinced that this roadmap that the world has set is more important today and more imperative and necessary than ever before. Fourth, it is urgent that the middle income countries have access to international financing in more favorable terms, as Elliot Harris has said, to respond to the urgent need for liquidity and to meet the challenges of the debt imposed by COVID-19. In all the countries in the region, without exception, the fiscal situation has deteriorated and the level of government indebtedness has increased from 69 to 79% of GDP between 2019 and 2020. That makes our region the most indebted region in the developing world. We must reiterate, and we have said that the indebtedness in the Caribbean is unsustainable. It already was, but the slump in tourism has increased the urgency to implement what we have said many times: debt relief for the Caribbean now. The only way that many of its countries can move forward, the only way that many of its countries can succeed is through investment to adapt to the effects of the environmental crisis. Latin America must show solidarity with the situation of the Caribbean and help them to overcome the double asymmetry that they face. They do not pollute, but they suffer greatly from the affection of the pollution of others. My dear friends, we have heard this at this meeting, and I reaffirm it today. There is no way to turn back. We must move forward toward a different future. Latin America, and the Caribbean cannot continue to tolerate, rather, the structural injustice that distinguishes it. It is time to put an end to the culture of privilege and inequality and to eradicate poverty in all its forms. We're concerned about the inefficiency of unsustainability and the inefficiency of inequality. The fact that there's no full access to education, health, nutrition, digital technologies means that we will be more inefficient even in the future. The world has changed, and not for the better. Thank you, Michelle Bachelet, for reminding us also of the political, environmental, and other rights. As I've said, the world has changed, but not for the better. What has worsened are national, regional, and global asymmetries. Friends, I do not want to close out these remarks without thanking the team of men and women that I am proud to lead at ECLAC, a team that has given the best of its abilities to the service of our region. There are many teams behind this event. Luis Yanez, our deputy secretaries, Mario Raul, the directors of all of the programs, the IT team, conferences, editorial services, general services, security, and everyone. Thank you to my dear colleagues for continuously giving the best of yourselves, authorities, guests, attendees, and colleagues. Today, I dare, as I take my leave, to recall the words of Octavio Paz, a poet and a major thinker on our continent, and to make his lucid words resound. And I quote, "Everything appears to be a giant mistake. Everything has happened as it should not have transpired. We say to console ourselves, but it is us who are wrong, not history. We have to learn to look and confront reality and look it in the face, to invent, if necessary, new words and new ideas, so that these new and strange realities that have come our way, we must think, which is the first duty of intelligence, and in some case, the only one." He has also said that I believe that the actions to strengthen the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, the SDGs and Decade of Action, are and will be the foundations of building a better future. We must work together. As Octavio Paz has already said, America is not so much as a tradition to continue as a future to bring to fruition. Thank you very much, and Godspeed to you all.
Muchas gracias, Alicia, por todo tu trabajo, por el
Thank you, Alicia, for your work, for your efforts, and for everything that you have contributed to ensure that this event has been a success. We thank you and your team at ECLAC, and I join the voice of the pro tempore chairs in congratulating all of the teams. We may be on screen and in the pictures, but there are many people behind the scenes who are doing the day-to-day work and who are there making their contribution so that our region can move forward to a better future. A better future and a different future. As you were saying, there is no place to go back to, and we need to move toward a different future with new paradigms and with new hope. Please allow me to just provide a few closing thoughts for this gathering.
I am very appreciative of all of the remarks, contribution, and everything we have heard from the various panelists of the forum, this fourth region of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean for sustainable development. It is truly enriching to listen to the various perspectives and the ways you have all taken action from your different corners. Thank you for telling us about your perspectives and ways to move forward towards sustainable development. It is precisely challenging today, given the current context. The pandemic has had a significant negative impact on the region economically, socially, environmentally, as well as in the health sector, obviously. Now, we aim to have post-pandemic recovery, making sure that it's inclusive and to fully implement the 2030 agenda. If we are to secure this, we must take into consideration the real data that tell us truly where we are today, where we stand. We must use science to our advantage, true, real science to understand our true context. Now, the data from the fourth report on the progress on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, this report, the figures therein are not so promising and encouraging, just the opposite. They paint a difficult picture, but they will still warn us of the jeopardy forward and how we will not be able to meet the 2030 agenda or SDGs if we do not do a better job. We need to take this input, this insight, and use it to garner more energy to push forward. Now, the GDP, regional GDP dropped 7.7% in 2020. And this, in addition to the growing inequality, high level of informality of our markets, as mentioned by Sandoval. This also is further exacerbated by the limited fiscal space of our economies, increased poverty that unfortunately affects women and children, as well as other vulnerabilities that are commonly affecting the countries in the region. Now, despite all of this, despite this dark horizon and the situation, what we must not do is just sit idle. We need to put forward the best of us individually and collectively. These data only show us the reality, and to change this reality, we need to work together to ensure we have green, blue, sustainable, and resilient recovery and sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development must be our roadmap toward the future, a different future that Alicia referred to. We need to emphasize the transcendental aspects such as gender equity, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable sectors, to insist upon creating multi-sectoral partnerships, reinforcing democracy, having access to technology, and equitable digitization, moving toward green, resilient recovery, as well as robust, effective multilateralism. All of this needs to come from the foundation of solidarity and international cooperation. personally speaking, from San Jose, Costa Rica, and from this post, I would like to underscore how this path is not something that the governments will follow down alone. The governments must be accompanied by all of these sectors: academia, unions, organized civil society, the private sector. That sector is essential. Local governments and all others who may make a contribution toward this recovery and moving towards an inclusive and sustainable future. And primarily, as many of us have already said here, all with a long-term approach. Now, Carlos Alvarado has made it very clear during his inaugural remarks that that is the path forward. It is necessary to reiterate that the worst consequences of the pandemic have been felt by the most vulnerable, the most marginal, and this calls for in-depth, profound change moving forward. That is the challenge we must tackle and face. Paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is essential. Doing something different to obtain a different result. And the specificities of the Caribbean and the other territories, those areas with which we share our concerns, we know that they're affected by climate change, and it is imperative to take decisive moves forward to address climate change, and that our efforts, all of our efforts, relative to development must be nature-based. And I will not tire of stating that nature-based solutions are not just socially beneficial, but they are also helpful locally at the community level, and they are a good business opportunity. Please listen to me. Private sector, listen loud and clear. Those of you in the development banks, this is what we need to do. That is the path forward. Moreover, nature-based solutions of this nature in each region are essential, and we are focusing on the middle level economies. Reconstruction, recovery, the development patterns must be innovative and sustainable. They must not include carbon and be inclusive. In the region, we have clear-cut roadmaps. We have reached a consensus with regard to the region's priorities in terms of the pandemic, and we have a political statement on sustainable, resilient, green development and recovery. We have recommendations and a report with regard to how to move toward this agenda. We just adopted these recommendations. We all have the roadmap well painted out for us. And this declaration provides us with a clear mandate to be unified in our position as a region at the high-level political forum that will be held soon in New York, but not just there, but in other fora as well. Let us continue to speak with a single voice for a different future. I would like to appeal to you for us to all pull together our efforts so that this voice, a single voice, be heard throughout the entire multilateral system. That is our responsibility. The onus is on us. And I would like to conclude by thanking ECLAC for its participation and all of the other individuals as well. Now, I will not bid you farewell prior to inviting you to a side event that has been organized by my country. Just another fora, correct? But anyhow, we always have an opportunity to discuss new ideas, and we are organizing an event to address sustainable, inclusive, and resilient reconstruction with the participation of the Minister of the Environment and Sustainable Energy of Costa Rica. And I would like to once again thank all of you for your very enriching contribution to this discussion, for your respectful contribution and your support for a better future. Once again, I would like to thank the team of the previous presidency, Cuba and ECLAC, for the active involvement in this fourth meeting of the Forum of Latin American and Caribbean Countries on Sustainable Development. And with these final remarks, I would like to bid you all farewell. Thank you very much, and best warm regards from San Jose, Costa Rica.
Hasta luego. Gracias. Un abrazo a todos los amigos. Chao y amigas. Chao.
Hasta luego.
Adiós.
Muchas felicidades.
Abrazo, gracias. Gracias.
Gracias. Gracias por todos.